I'm gonna try and convince you that whenever you think a game is similar to Hollow Knight, it really isn't as similar as you think. Prior to Hollow Knight, how many 2D games do you know that feel more like worlds rather than levels? Off the top of my head, I can think of like 3: Ori, Rayman, and Cuphead. And so, whenever someone makes a 2.5D game, it'll probably remind you of Hollow Knight. It would be like if there only existed one pixel art game, and that game was The Messenger. And along came Celeste. What would Celeste remind you of? Well, it'd probably remind you of The Messenger, because that's the only pixel art game there is. If you aren't convinced that this is happening, let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen a kid at about the age of 2 encounter an animal different than a dog for the first time and call that animal a dog? If you have, you might just consider it a curious oddity, but it tells you something about how the brain works.
I think that this phenomenon applies to everyone. So I want to try something.
I want you to look at this color. What color do you think it is? Now how about this one? If you consider both of them pink, just know that they're quite different. The first one is here on the color spectrum, and the second one is more of an unsaturated red. Okay, how about this one? And this one? This one might be significantly easier, you'd say turquoise and light blue. But how about this? Well, this is easy. This is brown. And how about this? Well, also easy, that's orange. These two colors could be argued are the same. Brown is just dark orange. When we evaluate something, we evaluate it according to what we already know.
It's kind of like we have a few buckets in our head, and each bucket represents the name of something we know. And then whenever we see something out in the world, the only way for us to understand it is by placing it in a bucket. And so even if brown and orange can often have the same hue, we can distinguish them quite easily because we have a bucket for each. But for other colors, we really don't have particularly good buckets. So even in my case, often when I see a 2.5D side-scroller, I think of Hollow Knight. It reminds me of Hollow Knight. But as I've tried to establish, I think at least a portion of that is that for the 2.5D parallax bucket, it's largely so far only populated by Hollow Knight. I believe that 2.5D side-scrollers will be its own visual genre. And eventually, people will see that there are lots of space for different games. I mean, no shade thrown onto Super Meat Boy, but each and every level actually kind of looks like a level. I think one of the reasons people really like Metroidvanias is that they like world building and they like feeling like they're on an adventure. In order to do that, you really don't want your game to feel like stitched together levels. And in order to avoid this, I think 2.5D is really the best way to solve it. So we really ought to want more games like this. That is how I view the problem as a consumer of games. But as a developer of games and developer of art, my view is slightly harsher. I'd rather polish a stolen cake than an original turd. If you don't know how to make things look good, you have to learn, and you learn from others. So incorporating other people's style into your own and learning from other games is par for the course. You have to do it in order to make something good. And so before you worry about something being generic or derivative, it's probably better to worry about making something that other people enjoy. That is where my advice comes in. When you view something as generic, it almost by definition means that it's derivative. But in this case, rather than being derivative of a game, it's derivative of an entire genre. Sometimes I encounter games that look really good, better than what I can do, but they just don't do anything for me. When I see them, I go, meh. They simply just look good, nothing more. I just know that these people must have spent an insane amount of time making that game look good. And my reaction is still meh. You don't want to be in that situation. You want your game to stick out and demand attention, even if aspects of it are kind of ugly, like Among Us. So how do you stick out? It basically boils down to adding something new and something fresh. And it doesn't even need to be entirely new. 90% of your game should probably be built on the backbone of other people's labor. Then you add something fresh and something new. I saw a trailer for a Kickstarter, I think it was yesterday, and the game was called Bow, which is kind of like Okami meets Hollow Knight. And that entices people. It entices me. Even though each of these maybe aren't new, seeing them together is kind of new and kind of fresh. Your goal is essentially to make something that makes people go, huh, interesting, or huh, kind of cute. So how do you know if you have that feeling or that kind of reaction, or it's just dull and people ignore it? In my opinion, you kind of have to ask someone else, and preferably someone who will just tell you meh. And then on top of that, you also have to be critical yourself. I don't know how experienced in art you might be, but you can't approach it the same way you do programming. When programming, you write your function, and when it works, you go, great, on to the next thing. Sometimes I see people approach art the same way. They draw a character, they fill everything in, and then they go, this is ugly. I can't draw. Of course it's ugly. You didn't finish it. You continue until it looks good. Or rather, you continue until someone says, oh, I kind of like this. Or, oh, this is interesting. This might lead you down a trap of constantly overcorrecting and redoing things. Like a painting I have over here, which I've been working on for 5 years now. But at least when prototyping a style,
Spend some extra time finding your voice, your uniqueness. And then once you have that, optimize and ensure that you have the time to repeat that process over and over again. When I first made my mushroom character, it looked kind of like a generic Mega Man. And that kind of meant that I had a decent base to work off of. And then I adjusted it and worked on it until I had something that looked moderately unique. To better illustrate this, I'll show you the character creation part of an upcoming video, which will be more of a dedicated tutorial on how you can hand draw your animations. I'm fairly certain that the final character will look something like this. But in order to get there, I also had to draw all of these. Some of them being really bad, and other ones being kind of okay. And I only stopped when I had both me and 2 other people kind of liking the final character. Which doesn't mean it's perfect. I mean, feel free to write if you don't like this character. But it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be better than your first attempt. I'll make a video on time management and reasonableness assessment eventually. But as a rough estimate, I think you want to approach the style where you can make each and every asset in under an hour. If you like this video and want to find out more about how I prototype my own style, you can watch this video. And if you want to have a discussion about what I talked about in this video, feel free to comment down below. Have a nice day.